Lucy Gray with BBC World News. Our top stories. Dutch riot police have used water cannon to break up a large protest outside the Turkish consulate in Rotterdam. Earlier, the Dutch government prevented 2 Turkish ministers from addressing the crowd. President Erdogan described the Dutch as fascists.
They don't know anything about politics or international diplomacy. They are very nervous and they are cowards. They are Nazi remnants. They are fascists.
More civilians from Mosul turn to the United Nations in need of help as the fight against the Islamic State group continues. We'll have a special report from one of the newly established refugee camps. After one of the worst outbreaks of yellow fever, Brazil's state of Rio de Janeiro starts to vaccinate the entire population against yellow fever.
We give love and a family dose. We are family. We are family.
And Joni Sledge, a founder member of the iconic pop group Sister Sledge, has died aged 60. The group's hits included We Are Family and He's the Greatest Dancer.
Sing it to me.
A diplomatic row between the Netherlands and Turkey has worsened as the Dutch government prevented 2 Turkish ministers from addressing a rally in Rotterdam. Dutch riot police used water cannon to break up hundreds of Turkish supporters who'd gathered to demonstrate against the Dutch government's decision. Earlier, the Turkish president described the Dutch as Nazi remnants and fascists. Sarah Corker reports.
In the centre of Rotterdam, Dutch riot police were brought in to disperse hundreds of pro-Turkish demonstrators. They're angry because the Dutch government banned a rally in the city about next month's referendum to expand the powers of the Turkish president. These extraordinary scenes came just hours after the Turkish family minister was stopped from entering her consulate in the city. This was her response.
This building belongs to my country and I am a minister. There is no such implementation in any international practice. I don't accept this. I reject this.
But she was later detained and escorted out of the country. She later tweeted, "Democracy, fundamental rights, human rights and freedoms all forgotten in Rotterdam tonight, merely tyranny and oppression." The Netherlands had blocked President Erdogan's supporters from holding referendum rallies because of security concerns, but deporting an official takes this row to a new level.
She has been declared an unwanted foreigner by the Dutch government, and the rules dictate that an unwanted foreigner must be evicted and returned to the country they came from.
In Ankara, protesters threw eggs at the Dutch embassy. There were demonstrations too in Istanbul. It all started on Saturday when another minister was blocked from landing in the Netherlands. That provoked these harsh words from President Erdogan.
They don't know anything about politics or international diplomacy. They are very nervous and cowards. They are Nazi remnants. They are fascists.
The Dutch Prime Minister described that fascist comparison as crazy. While Germany was also branded Nazis by Mr. Erdogan after it blocked Turkish rallies. This row is intensifying, and these scenes mark a new low in diplomatic relations between Turkey and the Netherlands. Sarah Corker, BBC News.
Ilan Tanir is a journalist and Turkey analyst based in Washington. He says that President Erdogan's controversial rhetoric isn't an accident.
The problem is there are only 5 weeks left in Turkey for the election. This election is referendum will be held on April 16. And Mr. Erdogan's not doing well on the polls this time for the first time. And many polls actually showing that no votes are ahead. And Mr. Erdogan and his officials realize in Turkey are not gathering the crowds it used to be. So Mr. Erdogan may be just using this tension to gather and start this excitement within his own base as well as in Europe, and it's all about the votes. So he may be thinking that he may be able to just repair all the damage he is causing now, but for now he's just going to go ahead with his outlandish rhetoric.
And for more analysis on this diplomatic spat and what's behind it, you can go to our website at bbc.com/news. New refugee camps, which have just opened around the Iraqi city of Mosul, are experiencing a surge of displaced people fleeing the latest government assault. Nearly 200,000 people are currently being sheltered in the 21 camps. Some to the east of Mosul are reaching capacity, while those to the south of the city are already full. BBC Arabic's Rami Rahayem has been to Chamakor, the UN's latest camp opened just last week, but there are fears that it could be full within days.
Yet another stream of refugees from Mosul and surrounding villages arriving at the Chamakor camp on the outskirts of the city of Erbil.
This is a new camp for the internally displaced, opened just a few days ago as authorities simply ran out of space to take in more people. And it looks like it's filling up quite quickly.
The latest arrivals have come from the village of Rihaniyeh, northwest of Mosul, where Iraqi forces have been advancing over the last few days. They describe a harrowing journey from their homes to the camp.
We called officers in the Iraqi army and they told us to leave at night and that they'd secure the road for us. We walked towards the mountain and IS fighters followed us on motorbikes. Finally, the army spotted them and fired at them and they fled.
We ran away and walked the entire night with our men and children. And when we arrived, we were received by the army and they helped us out. To my brother and my mother in Syria and all the rest of my family, don't worry about us. Thank God we've all arrived safe and sound.
The new camp can take in about 12,000 people. Authorities here say it is receiving more than 200 every day and estimate it will reach full capacity within a few more days. Rami Rahayem, BBC News, Northern Iraq.
A committee of senior British MPs say the government will be guilty of a serious dereliction of duty if it fails to properly plan for the possibility that Brexit negotiations conclude without a deal between the UK and the European Union. The comments by the Foreign Affairs Committee come ahead of the second debate on the Brexit bill, which is taking place in the House of Commons on Monday. Our diplomatic correspondent James Robbins reports.
We all know what set Britain on the road to Brexit, last year's referendum victory for leave. But we don't know what Brexit will actually look and feel like. 9 months on, a cross-party committee of MPs is warning that the coming negotiations could stall or be derailed. Their report says a complete breakdown in the talks would be very destructive, damaging both the EU and the UK. And the MPs argue that the government isn't planning sufficiently for a painful no-deal outcome. As the Prime Minister prepares to trigger the formal start of the Brexit process later this month, a government spokesperson has responded to the committee report by saying that David Davis, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, had briefed the Cabinet last month on the need to prepare not just for a negotiated settlement, but also for the unlikely scenario in which no mutually satisfactory agreement could be reached. Ministers are said to be confident Britain can achieve a positive new partnership with the EU, including a comprehensive agreement on free trade. James Robbins, BBC News.
Authorities in Rio de Janeiro say they plan to vaccinate the entire population against yellow fever as Brazil faces one of the worst outbreaks of the disease in years. There have been almost 130 confirmed deaths in Brazil since December, when the current outbreak was first detected. Pablo Ashoya reports.
On the heels of the Zika virus, one of Brazil's worst epidemics, re-emerges its deadlier relative, yellow fever. Hundreds of rare monkeys found dead in the Atlantic forest of Espírito Santo state, were confirmed to be carrying the virus. And the fear is that this disease, which largely affects the rural areas, could spread to the cities. Almost 380 cases of yellow fever have been confirmed in 3 states of Brazil's southeast since December. Over 900 are under investigation. And now authorities in neighboring Rio plan to vaccinate their entire population by the end of the year. Brazil last recorded cases of urban yellow fever in the 1940s, but recent prolonged and torrential rains have created ideal conditions for mosquitoes. Experts are warning that yellow fever could spread to countries as far as the United States, especially if it's carried by the same mosquito that transmits Zika. Pablo Showa, BBC News.
In other news now, a man with a backpack who was arrested after scaling a perimeter fence in the grounds of the White House has appeared in court in Washington. He's been named as Jonathan Tran, a 26-year-old Californian resident. President Trump, who was at the residence at the time, described him as a troubled person and thanked his secret security staff. Italian police and protesters have clashed in the southern city of Naples. It's where thousands were demonstrating against the leader of the anti-immigrant Northern League Party. Italian media says violence broke out when a group of masked anarchists hurled Molotov cocktails. British police investigating the disappearance of a young girl, Madeleine McCann, in Portugal nearly 10 years ago, have been granted more funds to extend their inquiry. The additional £85,000 will allow the search to continue for another 6 months. The 3-year-old went missing from a holiday apartment in Portugal while her parents were at a restaurant nearby. Protesters have held a rally in Singapore to protest against government plans to raise water prices. A 30% hike, the first such rise in 20 years, was announced in the budget last month. It comes at a time of slow economic growth and rising unemployment in Singapore. This was a rare public protest in a city where demonstrations of any kind are subject to tight restrictions. And Joni Sledge, a founder member of the iconic pop group Sister Sledge, has died aged 80. Together with her 3 sisters, she recorded several massively successful hits, including We Are Family, which went platinum and became an anthem of female empowerment, and Frankie. Let's have a look now at the time the group came to see us last year at BBC World News. Joni is singing in the middle.
We are family.
The music is inside our heads.
I got all my sisters with me. We are family. Get up everybody and sing. We are family. Sing it to me. I got all my sisters with me. Sisters all over the world. We are family. Get up everybody and sing.
Stay with us here on BBC News. Still to come. After abandoning its one-child policy, China says 18 million new babies last year is good news, but is it enough to prevent the ageing of its population?
The numbers of dead and wounded defied belief. This, the worst terrorist atrocity on European soil in modern times.
In less than 24 hours, then, the Soviet Union lost an elderly sick leader and replaced him with a dynamic figure 20 years his junior.
We heard these gunshots in the gym, then he came out to a fire exit and started firing at our huts, and God, we were all petrified.
James Earl Ray, aged 41, sentenced to 99 years and due for parole when he's 90, travelled from Memphis jail to Nashville State Prison in an 8-car convoy.
Paul, what's it feel like to be married at last?
It feels fine, thank you.
What are you going to do now? Is it going to change your life much, do you think?
I don't know, really. I've never been married before.
This is BBC World News. I'm Lucy Gray. The latest headlines. Dutch police have broken up a protest by supporters of Turkey's President Erdogan in Rotterdam. More civilians from Mosul turn to the United Nations in need of help as the fight against Islamic State group continues. China says more than 18 million babies were born last year, and its decision to allow couples to have 2 children instead of just 1 has achieved notable results. But it may not be enough to prevent problems caused by its ageing population. Andy Beat has more.
In the world's most populous country, with nearly 1.4 billion people, the birth of a baby comes every 1 3/4 seconds. 18 million babies were born last year. That's up more than 10%, with the trend set to continue at least until the end of the decade.
We predict that the annual number of births up to the year 2020 will fluctuate between 17 million and 19 million due to the influence of the universal second child policy. The policy has started to show its effect, and fertility rate changes are within our expectations.
China's controversial one-child policy ended in 2016. For 40 years, brothers and sisters were forbidden. Those who broke the rules could face forced abortion or sterilization, as well as financial sanctions. It's estimated that 400 million births were prevented. Now the Communist Party is investing heavily in the next generation, improving healthcare and education, and building facilities for mothers and infants across the country. But while births are now rising, there are fewer than officials had hoped. Many women are choosing not to have that second child. Decades of restraint on family size means small families are the cultural norm. It's a problem for Beijing. A growing workforce is essential to support its ageing population. And time is running out. By the year 2050, it's estimated that 1 in every 4 Chinese people will be older than 65. Andy Beat, BBC News.
In Georgia, a number of people have been injured in clashes with police over an apparent parking dispute. Hundreds of people gathered outside the police station in the city of Batumi, reportedly in protest at the arrest of several people for refusing to pay a parking fine. Police fired tear gas and rubber bullets to clear the crowds. More than 30 years ago, the Brazilian city of Cubatão became known as the Valley of Death because of its severe air pollution. Photos emerged of the effect of that pollution on newborn babies. And 3 decades on, the authorities are trying to clean up the air, as Camila Costa reports from Cubatão in the southeast of Brazil.
36 years ago, this place was known as the Valley of Death, a city where the levels of air pollution were so high that children were being born with malformations.
Cubatão, which might be the world's most polluted city.
These pictures from 1981 show just how bad it was. Clayton Jordão remembers what it was like to live so close to a complex of over 20 industries.
Once I saw a child here running and screaming. It's the rain that bites, he said. I didn't know what that meant, but later I realized it was the acid rain which burned the skin.
When Brazil chose Cubatão to set up its first industrial park in the 1950s, this seemed like the perfect place for it, as it's very close to Santos, the largest port in Latin America. But this mountain range behind me traps the air, the clouds, and the pollutants inside, effectively turning the city into a greenhouse. Change finally came with real-time monitoring of the air and filters in the chimneys of factories.
Brazil was one of the last to adopt simple solutions that other countries already used, like filters. Once we had an agency to oversee the industries, the quality of the air improved.
Industrial activity is still responsible for high levels of air contamination in Cubatão. Now an environmental engineer and a teacher, Clayton says the city has to do more. His students barely know about what happened in the 80s, he says. But he believes that keeping the past alive is the best way to prevent future mistakes. Camila Costa, BBC News, Cubatão, Brazil.
Now, Ishmael Ali is 4 years old and he suffers from a rare liver disease nicknamed lifetime jaundice. It means that he has to spend 20 hours of every day under phototherapy lights. Alpa Patel has been to meet him and his family, who are desperate to improve his life.
4-year-old Ishmael has spent almost his entire life like this. A rare liver condition called Crigler-Najjar means he eats, sleeps and plays under phototherapy lights for a minimum of 20 hours a day.
because he's missing an enzyme in his liver to break down what we call jaundice. He hasn't got that at all. So unfortunately, because it builds up, it's like a toxin in the blood, and as a toxin, if it goes to the brain, first thing they've said is it'll go like past the ears, etc. He'll become deaf, he'll get some sort of brain damage, maybe permanent.
He has to be cooped up in his medical phototherapy bed, so he absolutely hates it, especially because we've got a 7-year-old sister. So he just wants to run around like a normal 4-year-old boy and just run around the house and just play around with her. But it's almost like a prison for him.
It's hard.
Yeah. Your family take care of him 24 hours a day. How do you manage that? How are you coping?
We're not coping very well, to be honest.
The family have a carer that comes for 6 hours a week. But they are hoping to raise money through a crowdfunding page for a full-time carer.
Sleepless nights, and our little sister, the 7-year-old, she's not getting any quality of life either, because she says, you know, we're basically spending all the time with him, in and out of hospital, so we don't even get to play with her. So having someone, if someone could be with him, we can at least get a bit of break, a little bit of rest, and then be able to concentrate on caring for him even more.
It is very likely that Ismail will spend the rest of his life restricted by his rare condition. Frustrating for an energetic and cheeky little boy. But his family say they will do everything they can to make sure he has the best quality of life possible. Alpa Bitel, BBC News.
Sport now, and in football, Arsenal are through to the semi-finals of the FA Cup after beating non-league Lincoln City 5-0. It means they're on course for a record 13th title. Lincoln, who are 88 places below their Premier League opponents, will be proud of their performance, though, after holding their own for much of the first half. The win eases the pressure on Arsene Wenger after one of the most difficult weeks in his 20 years as manager. He now has the chance to win a 7th FA Cup as the Gunners' boss. Manchester City had a comfortable 2-0 win over Middlesbrough to join Arsenal in the last 4. David Silva scored just 3 minutes into the match before Sergio Aguero made the result safe for the visitors in the second half. City have reached the semi-finals for the first time in 4 years as Pep Guardiola aims to win some more silverware in his first season in English football.
So happy to be in Wembley, in my first experience in my life, to be there in semi-finals. We make an exceptional cup. We cannot forget all the games were away against Premier League teams, except one is the Championship, but Huddersfield is in the top of the Championship. So we had to work a lot, and we deserve it by far to be there. We are 3 opponents we're going to face.
In the other quarter-finals, it's a London derby on Sunday afternoon as Tottenham host Millwall, while holders Manchester United play Chelsea on Monday. In rugby, England have retained their Six Nations title after beating Scotland by 61-21 at Twickenham. It means Eddie Jones' side are unbeaten in their last 18 matches, which equals New Zealand's record. Joe Wilson reports.
Well, at the start of this game, we were expecting a tight match. Even the possibility of Scotland winning in Twickenham for the first time since the 1980s. They'd risen to 5 in the world rankings through some determined and highly skillful players in the Six Nations. By half-time in this match, we knew the game was up. Scotland suffered from their own lack of discipline. Man in the sin bin in the second minute of the game. They also struggled with injuries to key players in the backs in the first half. But above all that, there was Jonathan Joseph for England, exploiting any gaps with his skillful, powerful running. And when he's in full flow, it's a sight to match any that Twickenham has seen in over a century. From that point on, Scotland never gave up. They came back with tries in the second half, but the margin of victory made it a record in this fixture, and it's a fixture that goes back to the 1870s. Now, England have the Six Nations, but they're not done. Another win in Ireland in their final game of the Six Nations sets a record for consecutive Test match wins. But further than that, coach Eddie Jones, never to lose with England, says his sights are towards the World Cup 2019. We're only just beginning, is what Eddie Jones said at the conclusion of this game.
Boys today, fantastic, did it in style, very clinical, ruthless performance. We asked the team to make a decision, and I think as a team we took a step forward today, but all eyes on next week now, I suppose.
Chicago has been celebrating all things Irish at this year's St Patrick's Day parade. The traditional dyeing of the Chicago River green, now for the 55th year in a row, kicked off the day. Marching bands, dancers and the odd leprechaun then paraded through the streets for the thousands of people who came out to watch. A driver in China has ended up on the roof of a house after trying to avoid an accident. He said that as he tried to get out of the path of a motorised tricycle and an oncoming car, he accidentally put his foot on the accelerator rather than the brake, and as you can see, he looks rather embarrassed by it all. Fortunately, nobody was injured in the incident, and he was rescued by local police. A reminder of our top story. Dutch riot police have used water cannon to break up a large protest outside the Turkish consulate in Rotterdam as a diplomatic row between the two countries escalates. That's all for now from me. Thanks very much for watching.
Hello there. The stormy conditions continue across the eastern Mediterranean into the Levant. This area of low pressure is really whipping up some rough conditions, gale force winds, flooding rains, heavy snowfall, and given the strength of those winds, lifting some dust out of Africa. So there'll be some dust storms as well to contend with across Cyprus, moving into Turkey, perhaps a clearing away from Greece. Now, further west, we're starting to see a big change across Iberia, where we've had some real warmth. 27 we've had in recent days in Madrid. It's getting much cooler here and much more unsettled. Some flooding rains. We could really see some very significant rains, very stormy conditions across the western Mediterranean as we head through the beginning part of the week, and still some significant snow over the hills. It really does look inclement. What a difference from what we've seen recently. Only 14 in Madrid, and that heavy snow, particularly southern and eastern areas, and significant flooding rain potentially. High pressure sandwiched in between, giving some settled weather across the Low Countries, some parts of southern parts of England as well, but the low pressures keep coming in across northern parts of Scandinavia to provide more snowfall, more wind and more rain around the coast. Yes, so there are warnings out obviously across Europe for the coming few days. We keep things relatively dry for London and for Paris, for Rome as well. Things are settling down, but as I say, we've got that nasty area of low pressure for parts of Iberia, and it's still taking a while to settle down further east in the Med.
The concept behind the original photo was to shoot a Muslim woman wearing a hijab and to have it shot in the proximity of Ground Zero during a time when there was still a lot of questioning of the allegiance of Muslim Americans. Of course, I knew it would be used during the Women's March, but I didn't know how prominently.
Police in Berlin have described this not only as a planned act, a deliberate act.
We haven't felt any more earthquakes or tremors, and rescue workers will want the snow to hold off.
You can still smell the explosives in this area recaptured yesterday.
And this after they've been standing in queue for 5 hours. Now, at the moment, they can only take their old rupee notes.
He's become America's 45th president, and they'll be talking about this moment for centuries to come.
We break stories from more places than any other international news broadcaster. We are the leaders in global breaking news.
Through hardship comes creativity.
The landscape itself is a vast open-air art gallery.
Innovation in transport, furniture and architecture.
It's almost as if you've stumbled across a building from fairy tale.
Isolation, strength, horror.
So primal, so extreme.
The Art of Scandinavia on BBC World News.
This is BBC World News. I'm Lucy Gray. The headlines. Dutch riot police have broken up a rally in support of Turkey's president hours after one of his ministers was refused entry to the Turkish consulate in Rotterdam. As a diplomatic row between the two countries escalated, Turkey's Minister of Family and Social Policies was escorted by Dutch police to the German border. New refugee camps around Mosul in Iraq are experiencing a surge of displaced people fleeing the latest government assault against militants. More than 195,000 people are being sheltered in 21 camps. And the state of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil is to vaccinate the entire population against yellow fever. There have been almost 130 deaths in the neighbouring state since December. That's all from me. Thanks very much for watching.
Look out for more from chef Rick Stein on his culinary tour around India this weekend here on BBC World News. But now, how tourism is helping to keep traditions and culture alive for the Sami people of northern Finland. Adia Depitan is there for this week's travel show.
Coming up on this week's programme, I'm on an Arctic adventure deep in Finnish Lapland. I hang out with a rapper who's helping to preserve a nearly extinct Arctic language. And I get maybe too close to a reindeer roundup. I wouldn't want to get hit by one of them though. Hello and welcome to the travel show with me, Adia Depitan. This week we're in northern Finland. To be precise, we're on the frozen Lake Inari in Lapland, home to the indigenous Sami people, whose centuries-old tradition and language is under threat. Now I've come here to spend some time with the Sami people to see how tourism is saving their culture. Finnish Lapland is as close as it gets to a winter wonderland. More than 1 million tourists come here each year in search of the Northern Lights, Santa and his reindeer. The Sami are the indigenous people who live in this part of the world, from northern Norway, Sweden, Finland and the far northeastern part of Russia. There's around 6,000 Samis left in this part of Finland, and here they're known as the Inari Sami because most of them live around Lake Inari, which is 250 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle. I've never been so far north. I'm here. After landing in the town of Ivalo, just an hour-and-a-half flight from Helsinki, I meet my first Inari friend.
Hello.
Hey.
Welcome to Finland.
Thank you. I'm Adi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I'm Johanna.
Nice to meet you. And look at your outfit.
Ah, thank you.
You look amazing.
Thank you.
Is this our transport?
Yeah, it's going to be our transport for this trip, and we got so many things planned for you here.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm loving that hat. That's the way
thank
forward.
You. It's really warm. It's really warm.
Life here must be really tough. There's snow on the ground for 7 months of the year, and the most practical way to move around is by snowmobile. So this is the best way to get there?
Yeah, no, there's no other way to get there.
Okay, so this is how I'm rolling.
Yes.
And you're going to teach me, are you?
Yeah,
Ante.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Adi. So tell me about this machine, my friend.
Well, these are the things that revolutionized the life in here in one way. Because we got them about 50, 60 years ago to Finland, and this, made things much more easier actually in here.
So what did you use before these?
Skis.
Skis?
Reindeer.
Skis and reindeers.
Old school.
Old school. Normally when you're driving on a track, that you have your feet in here and your hands on the bar. And if you want to go right, you pull from the right one, of course. left to the left one. Yes. Well, brake we have on the left side.
Yeah.
This is the panic button. So if you lose control, something happens that you want, you just hit that one.
So I hit that button and then I go, Andy!
Yeah, then we're good to go.
Yo, it's so hard to believe that I'm on a snowmobile going across Lake Hanari in Finland, and beneath me is thousands and thousands of gallons of water. It's just crazy. This place is so beautiful. Woo! I wasn't expecting that. Around 30 years ago, the Inari Sami culture was on the verge of extinction. Inevitably, there's been a drift to the cities, to an easier life. Traditional cultures experience that loss the world over. But these days, tourism is creating jobs, allowing some young Sami to move back home. Inari Sami culture has been under pressure for decades. In the past, this community was marginalized and their mother tongue was banned from schools. With only 400 Inari Sami speakers, the language is still threatened. But one man is coming to the rescue using an unconventional method. Amok, you are a hip-hop artist and you rap in your native language, Inari.
Yes, Inari Sami language, yeah.
I mean, tell me about it, because I love hip-hop, but the last place that I would expect to find a hip-hop artist is in Lapland.
Yeah, in the middle of nowhere. Many people think it's quite weird doing hip-hop, gangster rap in Inari Sami language, spoken by 400 people, so that's the kind of a way that I'm telling about this little minority in minority.
Mm.
I like the sound that it's like a mystical thing that people don't know really.
There's only 400 Inari Sami speakers in the world.
Yeah.
Then, I mean, in that case, how old are they? What's the average age? Are you...
Well, of course, the most people who speak Inari Sami in their mother tongue, they are mostly more than 50 years old, or a little bit older people.
And those older people, are they into hip-hop and your rapping style?
I don't think so. But there are this new generation also, because there's a lot of revitalizing programs.
Okay, Amok, spit some bars from us, and I am pretty sure this will be the premiere on BBC of anyone hearing someone rap in Inari Sami, so we're looking forward to this.
Okay, so